The water in the main show pool is kept at a chilling 55 degrees, a temperature designed to mimic the North Atlantic, but maintained by industrial chillers in the heart of Orlando, Florida. It is a chemically treated blue, a color that does not exist in nature, brighter than the sky and more opaque than the deep. Beneath the surface, the acoustics are a nightmare. In the wild, the ocean is a symphony of currents and distant biological chatter. Here, in the concrete bowl, the water traps sound, bouncing the hum of filtration pumps and the screaming of 3,000 tourists off the walls in a maddening, endless echo chamber. Suspended in this blue void is Nalani. She is a 22-foot Icelandic orca, weighing nearly 7,000 pounds. Her dorsal fin stands straight, a rarity in captivity, and her eye patch is a stark, bright white against the obsidian black of her skin. She is motionless. She is not sleeping. She is waiting. To the audience settling into the splash zone with their popcorn and ponchos, she is a prop, a spectacle, a monster to be tamed. To the trainers standing on the polished stage, she is a colleague, a hazard, and a mystery. But on this humid Saturday in July, she is about to become something else entirely. She is about to become a striker. She is about to become a negotiator. If you are fascinated by the hidden intelligence of the animal kingdom and the true stories that shatter our understanding of the natural world, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You are not going to want to miss how this unfolds. The narrative of the marine park industry is built on a foundation of carefully curated illusions. The illusion that the whales are smiling. The illusion that they perform out of joy. The illusion that the bond between human and animal is one of master and willing servant. For years, the Ocean Worm Park in Florida sold this illusion with military precision. The music was triumphant, the water was sparkling, and the whales launched themselves 20 feet into the air on command, hitting the target ball with the grace of acrobats. Nalani was the star. Captured off the coast of Iceland in the early 80s, she had spent nearly 30 years in concrete tanks. She was the matriarch. She was the queen of the complex. Younger whales deferred to her. Trainers respected her. She was considered bomb-proof, a term in the industry used to describe an animal that performed consistently, regardless of the weather, the crowd size, or the chaotic energy of the stadium. Nalani did not miss cues. She did not break behavior. Until the day Jack disappeared. Jack Miller was a senior trainer, a man who had spent more time in a wetsuit than in street clothes. He was 45, with skin withered by the Florida sun and knees ruined by years of jumping onto concrete slide-outs. He wasn't the face on the billboards. He wasn't the young, photogenic trainer waving to the crowd in the commercials. He was the grinder. He was the one who came in at 4 a.m. to prep the fish buckets, checking each herring for imperfections. He was the one who stayed late when a whale was sick, sitting by the side of the pool in the dark, just talking to the water. And he was the only human being Nalani truly trusted. The bond between an orca and a trainer is not like the bond between a dog and an owner. It is transactional, complex, and fraught with danger. A dog looks up to you. A cat looks down on you. Pig looks you in the eye as an equal. An orca looks through you. They possess a level of emotional intelligence that neuroscientists are still trying to map. They have spindle neurons in their brain cells associated with processing complex emotions, social bonding, and intuition in greater density than humans. They remember. They hold grudges. They have favorites. Jack was Nalani's favorite. Their relationship had taken a decade to build. It wasn't built on food. Any trainer could throw a handful of capelin into a whale's mouth. It was built on tactile reinforcement and low-energy interaction. Jack understood that Nalani, despite her size and power, was easily overstimulated. While other trainers ramped up the energy, shouting commands and slapping the water to get a reaction, Jack went quiet. He would sit on the edge of the gi pool, the medical pool in the back, and just let his feet dangle in the water. Nalani would drift over, careful not to create a wake, and rest her chin on his boots. He would rub the soft skin behind her blowhole, a spot most whales were sensitive about, and she would close her eyes, exhaling a long, misty breath that smelled of raw fish and salt water. They would stay like that for an hour. No show, no crowd, no buckets, just presence. It was a language of silence. Jack knew when she was annoyed by the way her eye patch twitched. Nalani knew when Jack was stressed by the tension in his hand when he touched her rostrum. They were a team. And in the high-stakes world of corporate marine parks, teams are dangerous because they are hard to control. The trouble began in the boardroom, miles away from the smell of the salt water. The park had been bought out by a larger conglomerate, a private equity firm looking to maximize efficiency and cut overhead. They looked at the payroll and saw Jack Miller a senior trainer with a high salary, full benefits, and a history of pushing back against management decisions regarding animal welfare. They saw a liability. They saw an expense. They didn't see the linchpin holding the park's biggest asset together. The firing was brutal and swift. On a Tuesday morning, Jack was called into the operations office. He was told his position was being eliminated as part of a restructuring. He was told to hand over his badge and his keys. He asked to say goodbye to the whales. He asked for 5 minutes at the side of the pool to let Nalani know he was leaving. The request was denied. Management cited safety protocols. A terminated employee was a security risk. They didn't want a scene. They escorted him off the property by security guards, watching as he walked to his truck, leaving behind 20 years of his life. Jack didn't fight them. He knew the power of the corporation. He drove home, sick to his stomach, wondering how Nalani would interpret his sudden absence. In the wild, orcas stay with their families for life. They do not leave. If a member of the pod disappears, it is because they are dead. Abandonment is a concept they do not understand. To Nalani, Jack didn't just quit. He vanished. The next morning, the schedule proceeded as normal. The 11 a.m. show was the big opener. The stadium was packed to capacity. 3,000 people sat on aluminum bleachers, baking in the heat, waiting for the splash. The music swelled a generic, synthesized orchestral track designed to elicit wonder. The announcer's voice boomed over the PA system, welcoming the crowd to a celebration of the sea. Backstage, in the slide-out area, the new team was prepping. The head trainer for the shift was Sarah, a competent, ambitious woman who had been at the park for 5 years. She was good, but she wasn't Jack. She didn't have the history. She stood at the edge of the stage, checking her whistle and her treat pouch. The gate to the main pool opened. "Send her," Sarah radioed to the back. The gate operator cranked the wheel. The underwater gate slid open. Nalani swam through. Usually, this was the moment of high energy. Nalani would burst into the main pool, do a perimeter swim to wave at the crowd, and then slide up onto the stage to present her flukes. The crowd would roar. The show would begin. Nalani entered the pool. She swam to the center. And then she stopped. She didn't do the perimeter swim. She didn't look at the crowd. She simply logged. Logging is a behavior where a whale floats motionless at the surface, resembling a floating log. It is a resting behavior, but in the middle of a high-energy show environment, it is a statement. It is a refusal to engage. Sarah frowned. She blew her whistle a sharp, two-tone trill that meant "come here." Nalani didn't move. Her blowhole opened, released a puff of air, and closed. She drifted slightly in the current of the filtration system. Sarah blew the whistle again, louder this time. She slapped the water with her hand, a recall signal. "Target," she said, tapping the long pole with the red buoy on the end against the water surface. "Nalani, target, nothing." The music kept playing, a triumphant crescendo that clashed awkwardly with the static scene in the pool. The audience started to murmur. They pointed, Is she sleeping? A child asked in the front row. Why isn't she doing anything? Sarah signaled to the sound booth to cut the music. The silence that fell over the stadium was heavy. You could hear the hum of the pumps. You could hear the water lapping against the glass. Okay, folks, the announcer improvised, his voice nervous. It looks like Nalani is taking a little moment to herself. You know, even whales need a coffee break. Let's give her some encouragement. The crowd clapped politely. Sarah knelt at the edge of the stage. She grabbed a handful of premium salmon, the good stuff. She tossed it into the water, aiming for right in front of Nalani's nose. Nalani watched the fish sink. She watched the silver scales glint in the light as they drifted past her eyes and settled on the concrete floor of the pool. She didn't open her mouth. To refuse food is the ultimate sign of protest in a captive animal. A hungry animal works. A sated animal plays. An animal that ignores food is an animal that has moved beyond biological need into the realm of psychological warfare. Sarah keyed her radio. She's not responding. I'm going to bridge her. Send Kai out. Kai was a younger male orca, energetic and goofy. The plan was to bring Kai out to get the energy up, hoping his excitement would trigger Nalani's pack instinct. The back gate opened. Kai surged into the pool, jumping and splashing, eager for fish. He swam circles around Nalani, bumping her gently, trying to engage her in chase behavior. Nalani turned her head. She opened her mouth slightly, baring her conical teeth, and emitted a sound that was audible even above the water, a sharp, percussive crack. It was a jaw pop. A threat. Back off. Kai, recognizing the dominance of the matriarch, immediately retreated to the far side of the pool, huddling by the gate, waiting to be let back in. He wanted no part of this rebellion. Now, it was just Nalani and Sarah, and the 3,000 people. Sarah stood up. She looked at the control tower. She made the cut signal across her throat. Cancel the show, she nodded. The announcer groaned. Ladies and gentlemen, due to unforeseen circumstances, the whales are deciding to take it easy this morning. We are going to cancel this performance. Please check your park maps for other showtimes. A collective groan went up from the stands. People started to boo. They had paid $50 a ticket. They wanted their backflip. As the crowd filed out, angry and disappointed, Nalani remained floating in the center of the pool. She rotated slowly, her head lifting slightly out of the water. She was scanning. Her visual acuity in the air is excellent. She was looking at the stage. She was looking at the bucket stations. She was looking at the glass observation window. She was looking for the silhouette of a man with a stoop in his shoulders and a specific way of walking. She was looking for Jack. The park management assumed it was a fluke. She's just having an off day, the curator told the staff in the break room. Hormones, or maybe the water temperature is off. Check the chillers. We'll run her again at 2 p.m. She'll be hungry by then. They were wrong. Nalani wasn't having a bad day. She was beginning a siege. By the 2 p.m. show, the tension backstage was palpable. The trainers were on edge. Whales are dangerous when they are frustrated, and a whale that refuses to follow commands is a loaded gun. They decided to change the lineup. They would put 2 other trainers on stage with Sarah. Safety in numbers. They would use different toys. They would use the big splashes, ice blocks, gelatin, hoses. The crowd filled the stadium again. The music started. The gate opened. Nalani swam out. This time, she didn't just log. She swam directly to the slide-out, the shallow shelf of water where the trainer stood. She hauled her massive body halfway out of the water, resting on her belly. This was usually the start of a beach behavior where she would pose for photos. Sarah smiled, relieved. There she is. Good girl, Nalani. She blew the whistle and held out a fish. Nalani didn't open her mouth. Instead, she looked Sarah directly in the eye. The distance between them was less than 3 feet. Sarah froze. The look in the whale's eye wasn't aggression. It was inquiry. It was an intense, searching scrutiny. Nalani looked at Sarah, then shifted her gaze to the trainer next to her, then the one behind him. She scanned every human face on that platform. She didn't find him. With a slow, deliberate movement, Nalani slid back into the water. She turned her tail toward the trainers. And then she began to vocalize. Orcas have dialects. Each pod has a specific set of calls. Nalani's pod in the wild had a dialect that was lost to time, but in the park, she had developed a specific set of calls to communicate with her tank mates. But this sound was different. It was a high-pitched, repetitive squeal. It wasn't a call for food. It wasn't a call for play. It was a distress call. It echoed off the concrete walls, a mournful, piercing shriek that made the hair on the back of Sarah's neck stand up. The audience fell silent again. This wasn't part of the script. This sounded like grief. Nalani swam a lap around the pool, screaming. She stopped at the underwater viewing window, pressing her rostrum against the glass, looking into the faces of the tourists, screaming. She went to the back gate, banging her head against the metal bars, screaming. She's looking for him. A junior trainer whispered from the back. She's calling for Jack. Quiet, the curator snapped. She's just agitated. Get her back in the holding pool. Show's over. But getting her back proved impossible. Nalani ignored the recall signal. She ignored the slap on the water. She ignored the bucket of fish dumped into the back pool. She stayed in the main tank, patrolling the perimeter, vocalizing that same terrible, lonely note over and over again. That night, the park closed, but the problem was just beginning. The trainers who stayed for the night watch reported that Nalani didn't sleep. Usually, whales sleep by shutting down half their brain and drifting. Nalani paced. She swam the same pattern she used to swim when Jack was doing his rounds. She would surface at the exact spot where he used to sit, wait for 10 seconds, submerge, and swim to the next spot. She was checking his stations. By the third day, the situation was critical. Nalani hadn't eaten in 72 hours. A whale of her size needs to consume nearly 200 pounds of food a day to maintain body mass and hydration, since they get their water from the fish. Dehydration was becoming a real risk. Her skin was starting to look dull. Her eyes were sunken. Management held a crisis meeting. They discussed tube feeding her. They discussed sedating her. They discussed bringing in a veterinary behaviorist. It's behavioral depression, the vet said, slamming his hand on the table. She is mourning. You removed the alpha member of her social group. You took away her anchor. She is on a hunger strike. We can't bring him back, the vice president of operations said, his face red. He was fired for cause. It sets a precedent. We don't negotiate with employees, and we certainly don't negotiate with livestock. She's not livestock, Sarah said quietly from the corner of the room. It was the first time she had spoken up against the VP. She's smarter than us, and right now, she's winning. She knows exactly what she's doing. She is withholding her labor until demands are met. The VP scoffed. She's a fish. She doesn't understand labor relations. She understands absence, Sarah countered. And she understands leverage. She is the star of the show. No Nalani, no ticket sales. She is costing you $50,000 a day in refunds. How long do you think you can hold out? The room went silent. The VP stared at the spreadsheet in front of him. The logic of money was the only logic that mattered. Bring him in, the VP finally grunted. As a consultant, one day, get her eating. Get her back on behavior. Then we wean her off him slowly. But if he talks to the press, if he leaks this, I'll sue him into oblivion. Sarah nodded. She left the room and walked out into the humid Florida night to make the call. She knew Jack wouldn't care about the money. She knew he wouldn't care about the consulting title. She dialed the number, praying he would pick up. Jack, she said when the voice on the other end answered. groggy and rough. "Sarah, we need you," she said. She's stopped eating. She's stopped performing. She's just ... waiting. You have to come back." There was a long silence on the line. Sarah could hear the sound of a TV in the background, a lonely sound in a small house. "I'm on my way," Jack said. But as Sarah hung up the phone, she looked toward the stadium, looming like a dark spaceship against the night sky. She could hear it from here. Faintly, drifting on the wind, the sound of a high-pitched rhythmic call. Nalani was still awake, and she wasn't just calling for a friend. She was holding the line. The strike had begun, but the negotiation was about to enter a phase that no one, not even Jack, was prepared for. The negotiation between a corporation and an apex predator is rarely a balanced one, but in this case, the whale held all the cards. The park was hemorrhaging money. The splash zone was empty. The public relations department was spinning stories about routine maintenance and breeding, leave, but the rumors were leaking. Videos taken on cell phones during that first disastrous show were circulating online. Depressed whale was trending. The pressure was building, a hydraulic force threatening to burst the carefully constructed dam of secrecy. Jack arrived at the employee gate at 5 a.m. A security guard, a man named Miller, who had known Jack for 15 years, didn't ask for ID. He just opened the gate and looked away, shamefaced. "Good to see you, Jack," Miller muttered. Jack didn't smile. He drove his beat-up Ford truck to the back lot, parked in his old spot, which had been painted over, but still bore the oil stains of his transmission, and walked to the stadium. The air was thick with mist and the smell of ozone. The complex was silent, save for the hum of the filters. Sarah was waiting for him by the G-pool. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were shadowed, her posture slumped. "She's in the main tank," Sarah said, her voice low. "She hasn't moved from the gate in 6 hours. She's just floating." Jack nodded. He didn't ask for a wetsuit. He didn't ask for a bucket of fish. He walked up the metal stairs to the stage, his boots clanging softly on the grate. The moment his foot hit the concrete of the stage, the water in the center of the pool shifted. It wasn't a splash. It was a displacement. 7,000 pounds of mass reacting to a vibration it had memorized over a decade. Nalani, who had been logging facing the back wall, turned. She didn't turn quickly. She turned with an agonizing slowness, her pectoral fin slicing the surface. She oriented herself toward the sound. Jack walked to the edge. He sat down, just as he always used to, letting his legs dangle over the side, his boots hovering inches above the blue water. "Hey, old girl," he whispered. The water broke. Nalani surfaced directly in front of him. She didn't spy-hop aggressively. She rose like a submarine, her rostrum breaking the surface with barely a ripple. She exhaled poof, and the mist hit Jack in the face. It was warm. It smelled of her. She moved closer until her chin was resting on the concrete stage, inches from his knee. She opened her eye, that dark, intelligent eye that had terrified Sarah, and looked at him. She didn't blink. She just stared, drinking him in, verifying his presence, checking his scent, his heat signature. Then she made a sound. It wasn't the high-pitched scream of the last 3 days. It was a low, guttural vibration, a purr that Jack felt in his bones. It was a greeting. "You are here." "I'm here," Jack said, his voice cracking. He reached out and placed his hand on her rostrum, feeling the cool, rubbery skin. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to go." For 20 minutes, nobody moved. The VP of Operations watched from the control tower, binoculars pressed to his eyes, waiting for the consultant to do something, to feed her, to signal a behavior, to fix the broken machine. But Jack didn't reach for the bucket. He knew that if he tried to feed her now, it would be an insult. This wasn't about hunger. This was a reunion. Finally, Nalani pulled back slightly. She opened her mouth. She didn't snap. She just held it open, tongue flat, waiting. Jack looked back at Sarah. "Toss me a herring." Sarah threw a single fish. Jack caught it and offered it. Nalani took it gently, closed her mouth, and swallowed. It was the first calorie she had ingested in 4 days. Up in the tower, the VP pumped his fist. "She's eating. We're back in business." But down on the stage, Jack knew better. He saw the way Nalani was looking at him. She wasn't looking at the bucket. She was looking at the gate. She backed away from the stage, swam to the center of the pool, and slapped her tail hard against the surface. Slap. Then she looked at Jack. Then she looked at the gate again. "She wants out," Jack said. "What?" Sarah asked, stepping closer. "She wants to go to the back pool, the med pool, where we used to hang out. We can't move her," Sarah said. "The directive is to keep her in the main tank for the shows. They want to run a 1 p.m. show today if she's eating." Jack stood up. "She's not doing a show, Sarah. She just ate 1 fish. She's telling us what she wants. If we don't give it to her, she stops eating again." Sarah looked at the tower, then back at Jack. She keyed her mic. "Control. Request to open gate 2. Moving animal to G pool." "Negative," the radio crackled back. "Keep her in the main. Prep for show run through." Jack looked at the camera in the tower. He shook his head slowly. Then he sat back down and folded his arms. He did nothing. Nalani watched him. She understood. She turned her back to the control tower and logged again. The stalemate was back on. 5 minutes later, the radio crackled again, the voice tight with anger. "Fine. Open gate 2. Move her." The gate slid open. Nalani didn't rush. She swam calmly through the channel into the smaller, deeper medical pool in the back. This area was off limits to tourists. It was quiet. It was shaded. It was their sanctuary. For the next week, a strange routine developed. Jack would arrive at dawn. He would spend 8 hours sitting by the G pool. He would feed her, rub her down, talk to her. Nalani ate. Her color returned. Her energy improved. But every time Jack tried to leave, every time he walked toward the exit, Nalani would revert. She would start screaming. She would spit out her food. She would thrash in the water, sending waves crashing over the sides of the tank. She had learned the pattern. She knew that goodbye meant gone, and she wasn't having it. The park was in a bind. They had their star back, physically, but she was functionally a hostage taker. She would only eat for Jack. She would only perform basic husbandry behaviors, opening mouth for inspection, presenting tail for blood draw, for Jack. If another trainer stepped onto the stage, she would sink to the bottom of the pool and blow bubbles a sign of extreme disinterest. The splash zone remained closed. The financial losses were mounting. The board of directors was getting involved. They needed a solution. "We have to break the bond," the VP said during a strategy meeting. "It's pathological. She's dependent. We need to wean her off him. We'll decrease his hours. We'll have him stand next to Sarah, then have Sarah feed her while he watches. We'll fade him out." They tried. On Monday, Jack stood next to Sarah. Nalani took the fish from Sarah, but she kept one eye on Jack. On Tuesday, Jack took a step back. Nalani stopped eating. On Wednesday, Jack stood by the door. Nalani threw the fish back at Sarah, literally spitting it out with force, and swam to the edge of the pool nearest to Jack, screaming. The weaning process wasn't working. It was backfiring. Nalani was getting more possessive, not less. And then the unthinkable happened. It was Thursday afternoon. A storm was rolling in, typical for Florida in the summer. The sky turned a bruised purple, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Jack was by the pool. The VP, frustrated by the lack of progress, had come down to the deck to supervise personally. "This is ridiculous," the VP snapped, pacing on the wet concrete. "It's an animal, Miller. You're treating it like a child. You need to be firmer. Show her who's boss." If she doesn't eat for Sarah, she starves until she does. That's how training works. Jack stood up, his face hardening. That's how breaking works. Not training. You break a horse. You don't break a whale. If you push her, she push back. And she's bigger than you. I sign the checks, the VP snarled. And I'm telling you, this ends today. Sarah, get the bucket. Jack, get off the stage. Leave the complex. We are doing a hard reset. Don't do this, Jack warned. Security. The VP shouted into his radio. Escort Mr. Miller off the premises. 2 guards stepped forward. Jack looked at Nalani. She was watching the interaction. Her head was out of the water, pivoting between the shouting men. She felt the tension. She heard the aggression in the voices. Jack put his hands up. I'm going. Just ... be careful. He turned and walked away. The guards flanked him. As Jack disappeared through the double doors, the VP grabbed the bucket of fish. He walked to the edge of the pool. He was going to feed her himself. He was going to prove a point. Here, he said, tossing a fish at the whale. Eat. Nalani let the fish hit her nose and bounce off. She didn't look at the fish. She looked at the door where Jack had vanished. Then she looked at the VP. In the wild, orcas have a behavior called a percussive strike. They use their tails or their bodies to stun prey. But they also use water. They can manipulate water with such precision that they can knock a seal off an ice floe. Nalani sank. She disappeared into the dark blue. See? The VP laughed nervously. She's sulking. She'll come around. He leaned over the edge, looking for her shadow. He never saw it coming. Nalani didn't come up under him. She came up 20 feet away, accelerating toward the stage. At the last second, she turned on her side and swept her massive tail flukes through the water in a violent, calculated arc. It wasn't a splash. It was a wall of water. Thousands of gallons, displaced in a fraction of a second, rose up like a tsunami and crashed onto the stage. The force was incredible. It hit the VP like a truck. He was lifted off his feet and thrown backward. He slid across the slick concrete, tumbling until he slammed into the metal railing at the back of the stage platform. The bucket of fish scattered. The clipboard flew into the water. Sarah screamed, "Nalani!" Station. But Nalani wasn't listening. She had surfaced. She was riding high in the water, looking at the man crumpled against the railing. She opened her mouth and let out a sound that wasn't a scream. It was a laugh. A chattering, rhythmic sound that trainers associate with excitement and dominance. The VP groaned, clutching his arm. It was broken. He scrambled to his feet, slipping, terrified. He looked at the whale. For the first time, he didn't see an asset. He saw a monster. "Get her out of here," he yelled, his voice shrill with panic. "Get her out, but you can't get a whale out of a pool. You can only leave." The paramedics were called. The VP was carted off. The incident report was filed as accidental slip due to water displacement. But everyone who was there knew the truth. It was an assault. It was a warning shot. Bring him back, or next time, I won't miss. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting that night via video conference. The situation had escalated from a labor dispute to a safety crisis. They had a rogue animal who had assaulted an executive and was effectively holding the facility hostage. "We have 2 options," the CEO said from his office in New York. "Option A, we euthanize. We claim she's aggressive and unstable. Public relations suicide," the PR director said immediately. "Nalani is beloved. If we kill her, the activists will burn us down, and the other trainers will walk. We lose the whole team. Option B," the CEO continued. "We capitulate. We hire Miller back, full-time, whatever he wants. We give the whale what she wants, and let the inmates run the asylum." The VP shouted from his hospital bed, his arm in a cast. The asylum is already run by the inmates, the CEO said coldly. We just need someone who speaks their language. Get Miller on the phone. Offer him his job back, with a raise, and a contract that guarantees he stays with Nalani. When Jack got the call, he was sitting on his porch, drinking a beer, watching the storm pass. He listened to the offer. He listened to the apologies. He listened to the desperation. I have conditions, Jack said. Name them. I want control of her schedule. No more 5 shows a day, 3 max. If she doesn't want to perform, she doesn't perform. No punishment. And I want the G pool opened up. She needs more space. We open the gate between the main and the medical pool permanently. She chooses where she wants to be. That cuts into our maintenance capacity, the lawyer argued. Those are the terms, Jack said. Or you can go feed her yourself. There was a pause. Deal. Jack hung up. He finished his beer. He drove back to the park. When he walked onto the stage that night, it was quiet. The lights were dimmed. The water was still. Nalani was waiting by the slide-out, right where she had been when he left. He sat down. She rested her chin on his foot. You made a mess, didn't you? Jack whispered, scratching her head. Nalani exhaled. She closed her eyes. The tension drained out of her body. The strike was over. The negotiator had won. But as Jack sat there in the dark, he knew that this wasn't a happy ending. It was a truce. They had proven that the system was fragile. They had proven that the animals were aware of their power. And now, every time Jack walked onto that stage, the management would be watching, waiting for the moment the balance shifted again. And Nalani? She had learned something dangerous. She had learned that she could change her reality. She had learned that her behavior had consequences beyond the pool walls. She had tasted agency. And an animal that has tasted agency is never truly captive again. The show would go on. The crowds would return. But the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. The illusion of the smiling whale was gone, replaced by the reality of a conscious, calculating being who had drawn a line in the water and dared the humans to cross it. Jack looked into the black water. What happens next time, girl? He asked. What happens when I get too old? Or when you decide this isn't enough? The water gave no answer. Only the reflection of his own worried face stared back. The truce held for 6 months. To the outside world, the ocean-warm park had returned to its glossy, profitable normal. The crowds were back, the music was loud, and Nalani was performing again. She hit her marks. She splashed the front row. She posed for photos. But inside the complex, the atmosphere had shifted. The hierarchy had been inverted. Jack Miller wasn't just a trainer anymore. He was the warden of a very delicate peace. He walked the deck with a quiet authority that unnerved the executives. He didn't ask for permission to change a routine. He announced it. If Nalani looked tired, the 2 p.m. show was canceled. If the water quality dipped even a fraction, the pool was closed. Management gritted their teeth and signed the checks because they knew the alternative. They remembered the silence. They remembered the VP flying through the air. But peace built on leverage is never stable. It rots from the inside. The problem started subtly. Nalani, emboldened by her victory and secure in Jack's return, began to experiment. It started with small deviations. During a hula behavior, where she was supposed to spin in a circle, she would stop halfway, look at Jack, and slap her pectoral fin. It was a question. Do I have to? Jack would bridge her, blow the whistle, and give her fish anyway, reinforcing the idea that she didn't need to be perfect. He did it to keep her happy, to keep the peace. But in animal training, consistency is God. By rewarding defiance, he was feeding a new monster. Then came the mimicry. Orcas are masters of vocal learning. They can imitate dolphins, sea lions, and even human speech patterns. One afternoon, during a VIP tour where wealthy donors paid thousands to stand on the glass bridge above the pool, Nalani surfaced. She didn't do the expected vocalization a cute squeak. Instead, she opened her blowhole and emitted a sound that was low, garbled, and terrifyingly familiar. Jack. It wasn't perfect. It sounded like a wet finger rubbing on a balloon. But the cadence was unmistakable. 2 syllables. A drop in pitch at the end. She was saying his name. The donors laughed, delighted. Did you hear that? She talks. Jack went pale. He knew what that meant. In the wild, orcas use signature whistles to identify themselves and others. By mimicking his name, she wasn't just calling him. She was claiming him. She was pulling him into her pod structure. She was eroding the barrier between human and animal. That night, Jack stayed late. He sat by the pool, troubled. "You can't do that, Nala," he whispered. "You have to be a whale. I have to be a person. We have rules." Nalani watched him, her eyes bright. She blew a bubble. "Rules are for the small," she seemed to say. "We are the big." The breaking point came in November. The park had acquired a new animal, a young female orca named Kida, rescued from a stranding in the Pacific Northwest. She was deemed unreleasable due to a hearing impairment. The plan was to integrate her into Nalani's social group. Management hoped Kida would be a companion, a distraction, maybe even a successor. They introduced them in the G pool, with a gate between them. Kida was nervous, darting around, emitting high-pitched clicks. Nalani approached the gate. She scanned the newcomer with her sonar. Jack stood by, watching closely. "Easy, girl. Be nice." Nalani turned to Jack. She vocalized a sharp, demanding whistle. She looked at the gate, then at Jack. She wanted it open. "Not yet," Jack said. "Protocol says 24 hours of visual contact first." Nalani didn't like "not yet." She rammed the gate. The metal rang like a gong. She rammed it again, harder. The gate rattled in its tracks. "She's going to breach the gate." Sarah yelled from the upper deck. "Open it," Jack shouted, "before she hurts herself." They cranked the wheel. The gates slid open. Nalani surged through. Everyone held their breath, expecting aggression. In the wild, matriarchs can be brutal to intruders. But Nalani didn't attack. She swam up to Kida, who was cowering in the corner. She nudged the younger whale gently. She rolled over, showing her belly, a sign of submission and trust. Then she began to guide Kida around the pool. She showed her the rub ropes. She showed her the slide out. It was touching. It was maternal. But then Nalani did something that chilled Jack to the bone. She herded Kida to the front of the stage, right where Jack was standing. She nudged Kida onto the slide-out. Then Nalani slid out next to her. She looked at Jack, then at the bucket of fish. She opened her mouth. Then she nudged Kida, forcing the younger whale to open her mouth too. She was teaching Kida how to beg. She was training the new whale. "Look at that," the new VP, a cautious man named Evans, said from the observation deck. "She's mentoring her. That's great. It saves us weeks of training." Jack shook his head. "No, she's not teaching her to perform. She's teaching her how the system works. She's showing her the vending machine." Over the next few weeks, the dynamic in the pool changed rapidly. Nalani and Kida became inseparable. And Nalani was the clear ringleader. If Nalani refused a behavior, Kida refused it. If Nalani splashed a trainer, Kida splashed too. They coordinated. They synchronized their breathing. They synchronized their defiance. And they synchronized their aggression. It happened during the Christmas spectacular. The stadium was decorated with fake snow and lights. The show was the biggest of the year. Jack was on stage with Sarah and 2 other trainers. Nalani and Kida were supposed to do a dual breach jumping out of the water simultaneously. The music built. The signal was given. The whales dove. The crowd waited. They didn't jump. Instead, they surfaced at the edge of the pool, right below the trainers. They didn't come up gently. They surged up onto the slide out, sliding much further than usual, their massive bodies blocking the exit to the backstage area. They effectively trapped the trainers on the island of the stage. The music faltered. The crowd murmured. Nalani opened her mouth. She didn't want fish. She vocalized that low, guttural growl. Kita mimicked it. "Back up," Jack said to the other trainers. "Slowly. Don't run." "They're blocking the exit," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Jack, they're boxing us in." Jack looked at Nalani. The look in her eye was different today. It wasn't the soft look of the reunion. It wasn't the pleading look of the strike. It was cold. It was calculating. It was the look of a predator who realizes that defense is just a suggestion. She's testing the perimeter, Jack realized. She's seeing what we'll do. He grabbed the target pole. He tapped it on the water behind the whales, trying to get them to turn around. "Nalani, Kita." "Water." Nalani ignored the target. She inched forward, her pectoral fin brushing Jack's boot. She pushed, not hard, just enough to unbalance him. Jack stumbled back. "Hey, no." Nalani pushed again. This wasn't an accident. This was a shakedown. "Drop the buckets," Jack ordered. "Drop all the fish. Right now." The trainers dumped 4 buckets of herring and capelin onto the stage. 50 pounds of fish slithered across the concrete. Nalani and Kita didn't eat them. They watched the fish slide into the water. Then, slowly, satisfied with the offering, they slid back into the pool. They took the fish, but they didn't eat them. They played with them, tossing them in the air, batting them with their tails. They had mugged the trainers. The show was canceled. The audience was refunded. And in the locker room, the silence was heavy. "We lost control," Sarah said, sitting on the bench, her hands shaking. "Totally. They know they can bully us." Jack stared at his locker. He saw the picture of Nalani taped to the inside of the door. It was taken 10 years ago. She looked smaller then, less scarred, less aware. "It's my fault," Jack said. "I showed her that if she pushes, she wins. I taught her to negotiate. Now she's negotiating for everything." "What do we do?" Sarah asked. "Management is going to freak out. We can't work them together," Jack said. "We have to separate them. Nalani is corrupting Kita. If Kita learns that aggression works, we'll have 2 dangerous animals instead of 1. But separating them proved impossible. When they tried to close the gate between the pools, Nalani went berserk. She attacked the gate with a ferocity that shook the foundations of the stadium. She bit the metal bars, shattering 2 of her teeth. The water turned pink with blood. She would rather break her own body than be alone again. Jack stood by the glass, watching the blood swirl in the water. He felt a profound, crushing guilt. He had created this dependency. He had been the one to humanize her, to make her need him, and in doing so, he had made her solitude unbearable. The board called a final meeting. This time, there were no lawyers. Just the CEO, the head vet, and Jack. "We have a problem that cannot be solved with fish or contracts," the CEO said. "Nalani is self-harming. She is aggressive to staff. She is radicalizing the other stock. She is a liability we can no longer insure." Jack felt the cold knot in his stomach tighten. "What are you saying?" "We're moving her," the CEO said. "We've arranged a transfer. Loro Park in Tenerife. They have a large male population. Maybe a different social dynamic will reset her behavior. Maybe she needs to be a subordinate again, not a queen." "Spain?" Jack stood up. "That's a death sentence. The flight alone could kill her, and she doesn't know their dialect. She'd be an outcast. She'd die of stress." "It's done," the CEO said. "The transport plane is booked for Tuesday. You're not going with her." "Why not?" "Because you are the problem, Jack. You are the trigger. As long as you are in her orbit, She thinks she runs the show. She needs to forget you. Jack drove home that night in a daze. He thought about stealing a boat. He thought about cutting the nets. He thought about every Free Willy fantasy that had ever crossed a trainer's mind. But he knew the reality. Nalani was captive born in spirit, if not in flesh. She couldn't hunt. She couldn't navigate. The ocean would kill her just as surely as the park would. He had 3 days left. He went to the park on Monday night. It was his last shift. He didn't tell her. He couldn't. How do you explain a plane ticket to a whale? He sat by the pool. Nalani came over. She was calm tonight. The rage seemed to have subsided, replaced by a quiet melancholy. Maybe she sensed it. Maybe she smelled the change in his pheromones, the scent of goodbye. "I'm sorry," Jack wept, his tears falling into the salt water. "I tried. I really tried." Nalani nudged his hand. She rolled onto her side and looked up at the stars, visible through the open roof of the stadium. She let out a long, low whistle. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a threat. It sounded like a question. Where do we go from here? Jack didn't have an answer. The transport team arrived at 4 a.m. It was a military operation. Cranes, slings, flatbed trucks. Dozens of men in wetsuits. They lowered the water level. Nalani panicked. She knew what this meant. She began to thrash, screaming, calling for Kaida, calling for Jack. "Clear the deck," the transport lead shouted. "Sedate her." Jack stood on the catwalk, watching. He wasn't allowed on the floor. He watched as they jabbed the needle into her muscle. He watched as her struggles slowed. He watched as the light in her eyes went dim, glazed over by the drugs. They hoisted her up. 7,000 pounds of flesh and memory, suspended in a sling, dripping water onto the concrete. She looked small in the air, helpless. As they loaded her into the transport box, Jack saw her eye roll back. She was looking for him. One last scan. He stepped out of the shadows. He raised his hand. Nalani blinked. She let out one final sound. It wasn't a scream. It was the mimicry. "Jack!" And then the lid of the box was clamped shut. The truck drove away. The stadium was silent. The water in the pool settled, glassy and empty. Keto was in the back pool, calling softly, but there was no answer. Jack walked out of the park. He left his badge at the security desk. He never went back. Nalani arrived in Spain 18 hours later. She survived the flight, but the reports that came back over the next few months were grim. She didn't integrate. She was bullied by the males. She spent her days logging in the corner of the new tank, facing west, facing home. She stopped eating. This time, there was no strike. There was no negotiation. There was just a slow, quiet fading. 6 months after the transfer, a press release was issued. "We are saddened to announce the passing of Nalani due to acute pneumonia and failure to thrive." Jack read the news on his phone in a diner in Key West. He was working as a boat captain now, taking tourists to see wild dolphins. He put the phone down. He looked out at the ocean, the real ocean, vast and uncontrollable. He thought about the strike. He thought about the day she refused to perform until he came back. He thought about the power of that bond and the tragedy of it. She had loved him enough to fight for him, and he had loved her enough to let her win. But in a world owned by corporations and concrete, love is not a shield. It is just another leverage point to be exploited. The water out in the Gulf was blue, a deep, living blue. Jack steered the boat into the chop. He saw a dorsal fin break the surface, a wild dolphin, free, unscarred, swimming away from the boat, not toward it. "Keep going," Jack whispered to the animal. "Don't look back. Don't stop for us." He throttled up, turning the boat away, leaving the wild things to the wild, knowing now that the greatest kindness you can offer a creature you love is to leave it alone. The death of a whale in captivity is usually followed by a flurry of autopsies, press releases, and carefully worded statements about natural causes. Nalani's death was no exception. The official report cited a bacterial infection and age-related complications. They buried her story under medical jargon, hoping the world would move on to the next distraction. But stories, like ghosts, have a way of lingering in the places where they were made. And the Ocean Warm Park in Florida was haunted. It wasn't a haunting of chains and spectral figures. It was a haunting of absence. The main pool, once Nalani's kingdom, felt unnervingly empty. Kida, the young whale Nalani had mentored, was now the sole occupant of the primary tank. And Kida was changing. Jack Miller, now living a quiet life in the Keys, tried to disconnect. He threw away his training whistles. He avoided the news. But you cannot disconnect from something that has rewritten your DNA. He felt the pull of the park every time he looked at the water. He dreamed of the blue void. He dreamed of the gate rattling. One evening, a year after Nalani died, Jack's phone rang. It was Sarah. He hadn't spoken to her since the night of the transport. "Jack," she said, her voice tight. "You need to see this." "I don't want to see anything, Sarah. I'm done." "It's Kida," Sarah insisted. "She's doing it." "Doing what?" "Everything." "She's doing everything Nalani did. But, Jack, she's doing it perfectly. It's like she memorized the playbook." Jack felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "Send me the video." The clip was grainy, taken from a security camera overlooking the G-pool. It showed a training session. Kida was at the slide-out. A new trainer, young, eager, clueless, was asking for a peck wave. Kida ignored the signal. She backed up. She looked at the bucket. Then, with chilling precision, she swam to the gate and slammed her body against it. Bang! She swam back to the trainer, opened her mouth, and waited. It wasn't random aggression. It was a sequence. It was the exact sequence Nalani used to use to demand access to the back pool. Jack watched the video 3 times. Kida wasn't just acting out. She was executing a legacy. Nalani hadn't just taught her how to beg. She had taught her how to rebel. She had passed down the methodology of resistance. "She's not going to stop," Jack whispered to the empty room. "She knows the code." The next day, Jack drove north. He didn't go to the park as an employee. He bought a ticket. He stood in the back of the stadium, hidden among the tourists in his sunglasses and hat. The show was different now. The music was softer. The behaviors were simpler. The trainers stayed well back from the edge. Kida came out. She was bigger now, her dorsal fin starting to curve. She swam the perimeter. When she reached the spot where Jack used to sit, the Jack spot, she slowed. She lingered. She looked up into the stands. Jack held his breath. Could she see him? Through the glare, through the distance, through the sea of 3,000 faces? Kida stopped. She raised her head out of the water. She let out a sound. It wasn't the ja-ak mimicry. It was something else. It was the high-pitched, mournful whistle Nalani used to make during the strike. The grief call. The crowd went quiet, confused by the melancholy sound. But Jack understood. Kida was keeping the vigil. She was the keeper of the memory. She was telling the world that this place was not a home. It was a memorial. Jack left the stadium before the show ended. He couldn't watch her perform the tricks. He couldn't watch her participate in the charade. He walked to the parking lot, his heart heavy with a realization that was both beautiful and terrible. We talk about animal intelligence as if it's a ladder, with humans at the top and everything else below. We measure it in tool use, in puzzle solving, but we rarely measure it in culture. We rarely measure it in the transmission of trauma. Nalani was gone, but she had left a successor. She had left a testament. She had proven that even in a concrete box, stripped of the ocean, stripped of family, a spirit can survive through teaching. The park eventually closed. Not because of a lawsuit, not because of a protest, But because the magic was gone, Kida became unworkable. She refused to perform so consistently that the shows became liabilities. The crowds dwindled. The corporation cut its losses and sold the land. Kida was moved to a sea sanctuary in Canada, a netted bay in the ocean, cold and deep and full of life. It wasn't total freedom, but it was close. Jack visited the sanctuary once. He stood on the rocky shore, looking out at the pen. Kida was there, swimming in the currents, chasing live fish. She looked different. Her skin was shedding the dull gray of the tank, turning glossy black. He didn't call to her. He didn't whistle. He just watched, and as he turned to leave, he saw it. A pod of wild orcas passing by on the other side of the net. They slowed down. They vocalized. Kida answered them. Her voice mixed with theirs, a chorus of clicks and whistles drifting over the water. She wasn't alone, and she wasn't silent. The story of Nalani and Jack is not just a story about a whale and a trainer. It is a mirror. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about what we do to the things we say we love. We claim to keep them for education, for conservation, for wonder. But often, we keep them because we want to possess their power. We want to bottle the lightning. But lightning cannot be bottled without burning the glass. Nalani burned the glass. She showed us that an animal can go on strike. She showed us that an animal can grieve, negotiate, and ultimately choose death over a life without connection. She showed us that the dumb beast was watching us the whole time, learning our weaknesses and judging our morality. The next time you go to a zoo or an aquarium or look at a video of a cute animal performing a trick, look closer. Look at the eyes. Are they looking at the food? Or are they looking at the gate? Are they performing? Or are they coping? The natural world is not a stage. It is a sovereign nation. And when we cross the border, we need to remember that we are guests, not masters. Rest in peace, Nalani. You taught us the lesson. Now it's up to us to learn it. If this story made you think, if it made you feel the weight of the water, please hit that like button and subscribe. We are building a community here that isn't afraid of the deep end. Share this video. Let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay wild and keep watching.